College, Palayamkottai, the first and best ever college in India with the CGPA of 3.66 by the National Assessment and Accreditation Council. I wholeheartedly welcome you all. We have with us today our respected Father Rector, Reverend Dr. Henry Jerome S.J., respected Father Secretary, Reverend Dr. Alphonse Manikam S.J., respected Father Principal, Reverend Dr. Mariadas S.J., our eminent resource person, respected Dr. Bennett, respected Coordinator, IQAZ, Dr. Luke Sami and his team, respected Head of the Department, Mr. Twin Anthony Edward, respected Coordinator of the Department of English, Shift 2, Dr. Veer Lakshmi, my respected colleagues of our Xaverian family, Professor Dr. Joseph Durairaj, Professor Dr. V.S. Joseph Albert, respected professors across the nation, learned delegates, blossoming research scholars, and the bubbling student community across the nation. I deem it my honor to welcome everyone to this webinar organized by the Research Department of English on space as critical category in contemporary literature. To invoke the grace of the Almighty, let us bow down our heads and pray. Almighty Father, we thank you for all your blessings and protection that you have given. Let us pray. Almighty Father, thank you, Lord, for all your blessings and your protection that you have given us till date. Holy Scripture says, the Lord will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. In Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 10. As per the scripture, dear Lord, you have blessed all our endeavors and enabled us to see this day. We are glad that with your grace, thank you, Lord, for all your blessings. Be with us and guide us. Bless all the endeavors of our Xaverian fraternity and fill us with your divine blessings. I commit everything into your hands. In your mighty name, I ask everything. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Now let me welcome the dynamic head of our institution, our beloved Father Principal, to felicitate the gathering. Welcome, Father.
Thank you, Professor. Am I heard?
Yes, Father, we can hear you.
Good morning, everybody. Respected Reverend Father Rector, Reverend Father Secretary, respected HOD Mr. Twin, respected Dr. Bennett, the resource person for today's webinar, and respected professors and my once again, I greet you all with a pleasant morning. The topic that is taken for today's webinar, space as a critical category. Of course, I am a commerce disciplined person, so I may not know much. All that I know, okay, space, what do we mean by space in our normal day-to-day life? How it can be understood in a different context. Normally, when we say space, okay, it may be the gap. It may be the gap that is available normally. Or it may be understood as a kind of blank spot which can be filled in, which can be poured or something like this. Of course, there is a kind of, these days we hear about social distance. There may be 4 types of space according to the Google. It says intimate distance, which is about 2 feet, and then personal distance, which is about 2 to 4 feet, social distance, which is between 4 to 12 feet, and public distance, which is more than 12 feet. We also have physical space, interior space, outer space, inner space, all these things are. Nowadays, in the pandemic situation in which we live, we are all worried about social distance, which also speaks of the space, which speaks about our leading, maybe relating to our health and our different other things. Now, in the literature side, what do we mean by space? How it is going to help us, especially for research, how it is going to help? Only the resource person will be able to enlighten us. Of course, it may be, it leads to my simple understanding. When we have space at the mental level, it may help us to work better. It gives us some sort of peace of mind. And if you apply this to the research scholar, definitely it leads to imagination, some kind of better thinking, feeling comfortable. All those things can be attributed to this. That's how I think. I'm sure the resource person will be able to speak more on this, especially for an academician, which is very important. I'm happy that the HOD and the entire department has taken this particular topic in today's reality, which will definitely help us both academically and personally and socially. I'm sure all of us will really benefit from this talk. I have not seen the resource person, though I was in teaching for quite some time, but I have heard of him. I've heard of his talk and then his input. Wonderful person, I was told, and then very knowledgeable. Of course, I think we had him last year also, if I'm not mistaken. Last year also he addressed us. Therefore, we are happy to have you, sir, Professor Dr. Ebenezer Bennett. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm sure you are all terribly busy this time. Definitely, thank you for accepting to be with us to enlighten us on this particular topic. Once again, I appreciate all of you. I wish you all the best. May God bless all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your valuable address, Reverend Father Principal. We are indeed glad. Let me say a few words about space. All the world is a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. These Shakespearean lines from the pastoral comedy As You Like It illustrate some of the dominant assumptions about space, which is often seen as an empty container as well as a boundless three-dimensional extent which unfolds the real drama of human passions. It will be dealt in detail in today's webinar. Well, it's time to introduce our respected resource person, Dr. Ebenezer Bennett. He is an associate professor of English, and at present he is the vice principal of National College, Tiruchirappalli. He is a great intellect with a tantalizing academic experience of 3 decades. Shakespeare's lines on Cleopatra suit him too, as age cannot wither his academic pursuits, nor custom stale his infinite variety of achievements and accolades he has received and is yet to receive. He has organized and attended many national and international seminars, conferences, in-service training programs, and so on, within India and abroad. He is a member of the Board of Studies of many institutions with a great number of publications of research articles at national as well as international level to his credit. He has guided 47 scholars to pursue their MPhil research, evaluated more than 11 PhD theses, produced 8 doctorates, and currently guiding 6 scholars to receive one of the highest degrees in academics. Now, it's my privilege and pleasure on behalf of our Xaverian family to welcome our resource person, Dr. Ebenezer Bennett, to enlighten us. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. We are back again in the month of July. I remember it was during the pandemic last year in the month of July. I addressed your students and scholars on the topic post-humanism. Now, again, I thank your institution for giving me an opportunity. And let me thank the Reverend Dr. Henry Jerome, the rector, the Reverend Dr. Alphonse Manikam, the secretary, and the Reverend Dr. S. Mariadas, the principal of your institution, and Professor Twin Anthony, the head of the Department of English, and all others in the Department of English for giving me this opportunity to share with you some of my readings and also findings on space. Now, if you remember well, we have had quite a lot of discussions, or we have come across discourses on time, because we are always conscious of time passing, and people have talked about time in detail. Even the calendar that we follow today, the Gregorian calendar, it is something like a solar calendar, and we are conscious of time passing, and we have distinct seasons and so on. At least we have identified 4 distinct seasons in a year, and we know when time passes, we move from one season into another. And we have this lunar calendar also. Now, then even in our own culture, in the Indian culture, the ancient Indian philosophers and thinkers, they have divided time into Mahayugas. They simply call it Yuga. And Kreta, Treta, Dwapara, Kali. They call this the present that we live in as Kali Yuga, and so on. You have Mahayugas and Yugas. So there is a lot of discussion on time. But space, some or other, space hasn't received the attention it deserves. Now today, we are talking about, as your principal has rightly pointed out, we have become conscious of our space. And anything outside our body, we term it as space, and we keep moving about in space. But the moment you talk about space, what comes to our memory is nothing but the outer space, the cosmos. So I'd like to share with you, because this saves me time from spelling the names for you. Okay, so now when we start discussing space as a critical category and a phenomenon in literary discourse. Now, like postmodernism, because we haven't found an exact definition for postmodernism yet. Similarly, we haven't found a definition for space yet. And now today, because of the shrinking global and cosmic distances, we have become aware of space, and our perceptions of space also have widely altered. Now, simply put, space remains a physical thing as well as a mental thing. So what we conceive inside of us, we call that mental space. And the physical space where we live, where we move about, are the space that we are conscious of outside our body. Now, there is something called the literary space, and the literary space itself accommodates what we call the geographical space to social space and ideal space to ideological space. Now, what do I mean by this? When we talk about literary space, it's a separate category in itself. When people talk about literature or literary category, we talk about spatial practice. For instance, Michael D. Certo, he talks about every story is a travel story. The moment you start reading a piece of literature, you are mentally transported to distant lands. you are transported to a space which is far off. And he calls this the reading practice itself a spatial practice. Why? Because every story is a travel story according to him. Then there is this whole notion of space as not as something outside of narrative, rather it is within the narrative, an internal force that shapes it from within. So we'll see that in detail. I'm sorry that I'm going to do a lot of info dumping. I'm going to, there's going to be an information overload because the time available before me is an hour and a half. And I'll try to accommodate whatever I want to say within this an hour and a half. So, till today, there is no theoretical or analytical study of space, but there are so many descriptions or inventories of what exists in space. And we have come across discourse of space, and we have some knowledge of space. Even the knowledge that we have, I would say, is limited. Our knowledge of exospace, that is outer space, is also rather limited. And even within our solar system, what we call the sun and the 8 other planets, it doesn't extend much beyond our solar system, though we have knowledge of the cosmic space. And remember, we use terms like spheres in literature, sites, domains, fields, skates, topes, and places almost synonymously. But remember, each of these words is clearly nuanced. Each has its own meaning, and we need to be very careful about using each of these terms. So these are the terms, especially in literature, we talk about spheres, sites, and skates, and topes, and so on. Now, when it comes to fields of knowledge or domains of knowledge, we use these terms. Now, look at this. I will start with Gaston Bachelard, a French thinker. He has written a book titled The Poetics of Space, wherein he talks about at least 2 distinct spaces. Of course, I haven't mentioned here. One is a felicitous space. A felicitous space like our home, like our street, like our town, like our country, where we feel safe, where we feel happy, where we raise our families, where we live together as communities, where we live together as social groups, or we live together even as band groups. And this is a felicitous space where we live freely without any fear, without any fear of danger, and we feel happy about this space. Now, there is this other space, what he calls the hostile space. Now, this may be found even within our vicinity too, but the hostile space, it occupies a very limited space, so to speak. And I'll talk about this hostile space and the other things a little later. And he also talks about these small spaces within our homes, like even dryers, chests, wardrobes, or even nests, shelves, cellars, corners. And he talks about house with capital H, being a space where we all are inhabitants. We all need a home. We feel comfortable with the term home. In one of Robert Frost's poems, we come across this line, home is where you have to go and they have to take you in. So the space which he talks of as felicitous space is a space where you live, and this space is where you return at the end of the day. Then On a larger scale, the universe as a bigger space. Maybe we are all part of the universe, and sometimes we use this term, we are just a speck in the universe. That is true. But in this vast universe, in this limitless span of space, we find ourselves in a very small corner. So in his book, The Poetics of Space, he talks at length about space and how as a kind of space. Even he talks about the space within. When he talks of memory, now memory as a space. Now, as your principal pointed out, today we talk about there is no space in my computer. There is no space in my mobile phone. There is no space. We are talking about an invisible space which we cannot see with our, so to speak, our mortal eyes, but it is very much present within our mobile phones, our computers, our whatnot, whatever gadgets you have that you use for your communication. So yesterday someone pointed out, you have to, I told him, because I have a problem with space in my mobile phone. And I received plenty of information through my WhatsApp. It goes and clogs my gallery. He said, go to group info. There you'll come across media. Then go and press no. So it will not be recorded in your gallery so that your space can be saved. Okay. So now here, Bachelor talks about memories of our past. They are housed. He uses this metaphor of house to talk about even our memories, lived memories, or our experiential life, even our dreams, they are ours. I'll come to that. Now, then on the other side, you come across Arjun Appadurai. Now, in one of his famous essays, he divides the society or the world in which we live into many scapes. Now, we have heard of landscape, seascape, estatescape, right, skyscape, and so on. But look at this, there are physical scapes. When we talk of landscape, or when we talk of seascape, or when we talk of estatescape, and so on. But he talks about another scape. Some of them are visible and some of them are not exactly visible. Look at these two scapes, ethnoscapes and technoscapes. Now, when we talk about ethnoscape, it is about people living in groups, people who are congregated in a particular region or in a particular area which they occupy. For instance, we talk about Europe as a distinct ethnic landscape, right? Europe, which belongs to, let's not talk about race. Now it's increasingly becoming what we call pluralistic, at least the cities and towns and urban centers. But still, even in such urban centers, you go to a place like New York, you have a Chinatown where the Chinese live together in one small area of a huge megalopolis like New York, or something like the Boston area, or something like London, which he talks of as ethnoscape. And we people, we live here in India, the Chinese, they have their own country. So when we talk about ethnoscapes, mostly we refer to nations where certain ethnic groups are predominant, where certain racial groups have made these regions their own home. Now, look at mediascape. We'll come to that later. They are all interconnected. What I want you to remember is the interconnectedness of all these scapes. Mediascapes, yes. Now, today you have your television, your mobile phones, your internet telephony has facilitated what we call media, and it has expanded the media scape and technoscapes. The world went through at least 3 distinct phases, or our civilization went through 3 distinct phases according to Alvin Toffler. He talks about the agrarian way, then the industrial way, then the third one, what we call the technology, right? The third way. Now, the technoscape. Now, today, the technoscape is partly visible and partly invisible. Now, this is a very important scape where you find that technology has its own presence. It has intervened powerfully into our own lives. We have so many factories and so many industries which are run with the help of science and technology. And the industrial landscape is a distinct scape, or the technoscape is distinct. Then finance scapes, yes, it includes your banking system, your commerce, your online commerce, and many such things. And it also includes your the market, or what we call the speculative market. The market may be bullish or it may be bearish. Now, huge transactions of money, huge transactions of wealth through what we call finance scapes and also ideoscapes. Now, ideology and nations are made or created with powerful ideologies. Today, China remains a communist country, but it's a very difficult to define China today. It claims to be a communist country. Yesterday, I was looking into the anniversary of a Chinese Communist Party coming into power. But for all practical purposes, it has a capitalist economy, but it swears by communist ideology. It's a cleft nation, according to some people, which moves between two extreme ideologies. Okay, ideoscape. Now, here in India, we talk about ideology enshrined in our constitution. For example, the preamble of our constitution says, India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. These 5 ideologies govern our nation: sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. So every nation is governed by a particular ideology or our subscription to particular way of thinking or ennoble thought. Okay, so ideoscape. Now all of them are interconnected and they work together. Now just move on. This is a definition given by Merleau-Ponty. He uses the term point horizon structure, which he calls is the foundation of space. He says space is not something which is empty, and he says it has multiplicity of points here, 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 here. And he talks about the motility of body, the movement of body, that clearly shows the spatiality. Now, our body that moves in space, take for instance a dancer. When a dancer dances on the stage, she has or he has a free movement, and the movement takes place in multiple spheres, but it is the movement and the body in movement, and the dancer knows her or his relationship with the space. Whether you kick up your leg, or you move your hands, or you turn your face, or you move about, it is all about your body and how your body moves in space. I'll quickly move on. Now, there is a multitude of spaces. Let us be very clear. It is geographical in nature. It could be an economic space, right, where your business and your economy thrives, or the economic space. Now, this pandemic is all about economics also. So, why is the government, opening certain shops? Because we have to keep the economy humming, right? It is going to affect our gross domestic product, the GDP. It is going to affect the GST revenue of the government, and people are talking about putting money in the hands of people. so that people could spend. It is economic space, a very distinct space. Then the demographic space, that is where people live, how people live. Now, India is a very, very thickly populated country, as we all know. So within a very small space, say Canada is 7 times bigger than India when it comes to its geography. But the Canadian population is just 3.5 crores, whereas the Indian population is nearly 138 crores. Now, look at Australia. They have a huge space. It is the demographic space is split. Now, those who are familiar with the poem Australia, now the poet says, do you call this a country which has just 5 cities and very, very small towns? But it's a huge land, a vast land, a terra nullius. There, the demography is different. But demographic changes also take place because of migrant people or people's movement from one place to another. Then I'll quickly move on. You have the social space, the ecological space, political space, commercial space. I'll be explaining them in due course. Media space, national space. We have clearly demarcated boundaries, and sometimes we have border skirmishes. We continue to have border skirmishes with China and with Pakistan, and we have problems because these are all arbitrarily drawn, we know, and continental space, then global and cosmic. Then we have very narrow spaces, specialized spaces, like our space for work. And today my space for work is my room, this room, where I sit right in front of my computer, and most people have taken to working from their homes. So now that is your space, your leisure space, your play, transportation, public facilities, all are spoken in spatial terms. Now, we'll move on to what social space is. Now, what is social space? Now, space, as we say, as we have seen, it has a lot of geographical meaning, and I have made it clear it is physical space and also mental space. As Immanuel Kant says, the Kantian space, according to him, is a priori realm of consciousness. I'll talk about it a little later about Kant and others who have discussed the mental space, including Edmund Husserl. Now, we'll have a look at the social space. Now, Durkheim, Emil Durkheim, his concept of social reality is this. He talks about our social reality as an ensemble of invisible relations. We are all interconnected, and we are all connected together. And the moment we talk about social reality, it includes our life, right? Now, today, look at our social reality, which is certainly different from that of the reality which we know as normal a year ago, or maybe a year and 3 months ago. What we experience as normal, it is no longer the same. We talk about new normal or as new social reality. So today we keep distance with others, and we don't even shake hands with others. And suppose someone coughs or someone blows his nose, we all get scared, right? The social reality today is absolutely different. And we have limited number of vehicles running on the road, limited number of public transport vehicles. There are so many things. We are not able to travel as easily as we want. So now our economy is on the downswing. So all this, the invisible relations. So remember, a human being is a social animal. A human being, we are all social animals. We need to connect with one another. We need to be seen. We want to feel that we are together. And today we are keeping ourselves away from each other. That is a different reality for us today. But remember, social reality, it is an ensemble of invisible relations. It includes your government, your polity, right? Then it includes so many sections of the society, right? And we construct a space, or we produce a space. And how we construct it, according to Pierre Bourdieu, he talks about, I'm not going to discuss in detail, he talks about economic capital, cultural capital, social capital, and symbolic capital. And according to him, they are distributed within the social space and they construct the social space. I'll just explain what these things are. For example, when we talk of cultural capital, a country like India is very rich in cultural capital. We know more than 3,000 years of history, and it is one continuous way of life. And there are many cultures which have deterritorialized for some time. The ancient culture of India, I'm using a spatial term, and they have re-territorialized. Now, this deterritorialization, of course, these two terms are used by Felix and Guattari. For instance, actually, they have used it in a different context. They talk about desire and drive, okay? And they talk about the drive and desire, how the desire goes and deterritorialize with the other, and how it happens. But people have borrowed this and they use this to talk about societies and construction of societies. I'll just give you an example, perhaps you can understand. In South America, for example, in countries like Colombia and those regions, where or in the southern part, where you have the Aztecs, the Mayans, and others they live. Now, they had this culture for thousands of years. When the Spanish-speaking Catholic culture went there, it went and implanted itself, and it deterritorialized the native culture for let us say 200 years or so. Now, after so many years, there is this re-territorialization, or the native groups, they try to bring back some of their cultural practices, which we can call our social practices again, and they try to re-territorialize. Okay, now we talk of such things as cultural capital, and any of this can be converted into another. Cultural capital can be converted into economic capital by way of encouraging tourism and so on. And there can be social capital, which can also be converted into a symbolic capital or any such capital. And remember, the social space is not exactly the physical space or the living space where we live on. It is an ensemble of many things. Now, look at Soren Kierkegaard. Now, he was a Christian existentialist, as we all know. Now, he talks about three existence spheres. Now, look at him. He talks in terms of spheres, right? Now, today, we use the term sphere in politics also. Now, our sphere of influence. For example, they say the American sphere of influence is fast waning. They are going to withdraw the forces from Afghanistan. They are withdrawing the forces from Iraq. And American forces will not be present enough in foreign soil any longer. That shows the shrinking sphere of influence. And some people say the rising sphere of influence of the Chinese, especially in Southeast Asia. They are creating the sphere of influence in Sri Lanka and so on. Now, I'm not going into it. Now, look at it. When you talk about sphere, a particular area where you hold sway or control over others, and you also have your hegemonic influence. But Soren Kierkegaard talks about a different existence. According to him, it is the ethical, the religious, and the aesthetic sphere. So now look at the importance he gives to ethics, your personal ethics, your business ethics, your personal ethics. The moment you talk about personal ethics, your life itself is controlled by values. They are controlled by certain moral principles, which you convert into your personal ethics and you live your life accordingly. So now that is by Soren Kierkegaard. I'll come to Clifford Geertz a little later. Let's take a look at the mental space. Now, according to Karl Popper, he proposed the idea of the existence of three distinct worlds. Now, world number one, the world of physical objects, what we see around us, maybe the environment in which we live, the world of physical objects, events, and even biological entities. That includes our flora, our fauna, human beings, and what happens in this world, which he calls world one. Then world two, he talks about the world of mental events and mental objects. Now, what do we mean by mental events? This is also a distinct space, according to Karl Popper. That is the world of mental events. So what happens within us is known only to us, right? So what you think, there are certain mental events. Now, when we talk of mental events, now participants kindly forgive me. I'm not able to read any of your comments on the chat box. Now, I request the organizers to record those questions at the end. I'll be happy to answer those questions at the end. Unfortunately, I'm not reading any of your comments on the chat box. Thank you. So now, the mental events and objects. So the mental objects. Now, what do we mean by mental objects? Because we know object as something that is physically present, that is verifiable, you can touch and feel and you can see. But what are mental objects? Now, these mental objects are something quite distinct, which we create. We humans, we create even before they come into existence. Now, suppose I want to create a new toy. I'm a toy maker. Let us assume that I am a toy maker. First, that object exists in my mind before it has a real physical existence. So there are mental objects, right? Now, I'm not going to dwell at length on that because some of them are can be easily understood and some of them are well known to you. Now, look at the world 3, the world of products of the human mind. Right. There are abstract objects too. Now, I was telling you about the physical objects which have their existence in human mind before they have a physical existence. It is something like a blueprint. Before a home comes to an existence, you visualize something, or you visualize a building, you visualize an object. That is also possible. Then there are other abstract objects like theories, formulae, learning. Now, our abstract thinking, of course, our philosophers and our scientists, they're all known for abstract thinking and abstract thoughts or abstract objects. Now, that is world 3. So I'm carefully using this word, world 1, world 2, and world 3, because according to him, world 3 is partly autonomous from the other 2. And he says, world 3 can leave its impact or it can impact on worlds 1 and 2. This is according to the British philosopher Karl Popper. Now, Freud and Lacan, they talk about this human mind in terms of what we call topographies. So now, remember Freud. I'll quickly pass on. These things are well known to you. Remember Freud. He talks about the psychical apparatus, the human mind, right, as consisting of three distinct regions. The first one he proposed was the unconscious, the pre-conscious, and the conscious. Later, he employed the terms ego and superego, and he was thinking in terms of, it was almost analogical to geography, analogical to a terrain, like the mind as terrain, the human mind as terrain, a particular space where you can find the unconscious, the pre-conscious, and conscious. Later, he used ego and superego, but he retained this idea of spatial separation. Now, I'm not going into Lacan now, I'll move. This Kantian space, which I already introduced you to, according to Kant, this realm of unconsciousness that is within the human, of the subject, which cannot be fathomed, which cannot be plumbed. You cannot plumb the depths of the human mind. There is a verse in the Bible which says, who can plumb the human heart? No one can, because that is a distinct realm, right? Maybe Freud attempted something like dividing it into ego and superego. But according to Kant, this inner space that exists within us, or the mental space, which is purely internal, an ideal, being a philosopher, an ideal philosopher himself, he thought of this space as an ideal space. And he is on record saying it is ungraspable. It is transcendent. And the entire structure of this inner space is absolutely ungraspable. And we cannot really understand this. Now, Edmund Husserl, we know, who introduced us to these terms, what we call transcendental subjectivity, and he also talks about phenomenology. I'm not going to talk about phenomenology, but his obsession with human consciousness. So he talks in detail about this inner world, this inner mind. So, and consciousness. And according to him, there are two types of consciousness. Of course, I haven't mentioned them here. There are two types of consciousness. One is this consciousness is directed at an object. Now I am conscious of the computer, that is the desktop computer that is before me. And I am also conscious of the hundreds of listeners. And I'm conscious of even something that is before me, including my lecture notes and the computer screen. Okay, now at this moment, this is what my mind is conscious about, or my consciousness is directed at an object which he calls noesis. N-O-E-S-I-S-S. Noesis is what my consciousness is directed at. Okay. He also uses the term, the object that is my consciousness is directed at an object which Husserl calls noesis. The object that consciousness is, that is the object. It could be an abstract thought, or an abstract object, or it could be a concrete object. It could be anything, which he calls noema, N-O-E-M-A, M-A, N-O-E-M-A. That is an object that the consciousness is that. He calls that object noema and consciousness noesis. Now, this is about mental space. Now we'll move on to the literary space. The literary space is a very distinct space, as I pointed out earlier. it's a travel story. Every literature is about a travel story. But literature is full of distinct spaces, and some of them are living spaces. Look at the ancient pastoral and pastoral elegies. When Virgil wrote his Eclogues, now this was later imitated by someone like Edmund Spenser, who wrote the Shepherd's Calendar. Interestingly enough, Edmund Spenser's The Shepherd's Calendar is about time as well as space. So it includes 12 months of the Gregorian calendar, the shepherd's calendar. But the shepherd, who is basically a human being who lives in a particular space, namely the pasture. And some of the shepherds have even nomadic life. Well, Sir Philip Sidney's Arcadia is also about this particular space, which is away from the town, which is away from the village. The dwelling of a shepherd is certainly outside the village, not within the village. And the place where the cattle, where the sheep, where all those animals, they are grazed, including the grazing territory, which we call the pasture. And in English, we have something called pastoral elegies. At one time, the graves were outside the towns, outside the villages. I do not know, maybe after the enclosure movement, they all moved within the towns and within the cities. So now, if you remember, Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard, which is a pastoral elegy as well as a topographical poem. The moment we talk of topography, it is about a particular place. So in literature, when John Denham wrote his Cooper's Hill for the first time in 1642, he had a complete break from the metaphysical poets and from the Cavalier poets who wrote many personal poems about human beings. The sonnets were in vogue. The sonnet writing was in vogue. And they were all purely personal. Now, when John Denham wrote his Cooper's Hill, it is about a particular place, a particular territory. He was writing about something distinct, not exactly about human beings. Of course, Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard, it's a topographical poem as well as a pastoral elegy. Oliver Goldsmith, when he wrote A Deserted Village, he was talking about the village that he had left behind in Ireland. Well, that was Oliver Goldsmith. When you read Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey, right, this is an abbey that was situated on the banks of River Wye. This is about a structure that is almost collapsing, Tintern Abbey, about a particular topography or place. Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach, or even Geoffrey Hill's Mercian hymns. It is about a particular space which was there in time past, which is no longer there. But the space exists, but the communities that existed, they are no longer there. Geoffrey Hills. And when Seamus Heaney wrote this essay, Inlands of the Mind, he makes a distinction. The topography in your mind, the nation exists in your mind. What is India? When we talk of India, or when we talk of Tamil Nadu, it is something about a particular geographical space for which we have given a shape, and it has its existence in our mind, right? As you fly on an aircraft, crossing across nations, right? You don't see the national boundaries from above, clearly drawn. This is India, this is there. Or even if when a satellite photograph is taken, it shows the entire globe. It shows the world. It doesn't show any distinct national boundaries and so on. So, not only Seamus Heaney, some of the war poets, I think one of the war poets, I think it was Drew, who said, wherever I'm buried, it is Little England. Wherever I am buried, it doesn't matter where I die as a British soldier, as an English soldier, and wherever I am buried, you can call it a Little England. So whenever I look at the cemetery near my church, where many graveyards could be found, the graveyards of people who lived even during the last century, I used to wonder whether each of them could be called a Little England, because most of them are from England and their graveyards could be found there. So England's of the mind, you go and read Seamus Heaney. Then in literature itself, we use a lot of terms like Gothic, Baroque, postmodern. All the three are architectural terms. Now, Gothic romances, which were very popular during the second part of 18th century, and many of you are aware of the Gothic writers of fiction. It is all about underground walls and dilapidated buildings, abandoned churches, and abandoned forts. All right. So that world is, the Gothic world is different. Baroque, again, an architectural term, right? And postmodern novels, but I'm not going into that. This is just for refreshing your memory. So these are all architectural terms which are widely used. So the literary space could also be imaginary, and they may not have any physical existence. For example, people say Thomas Hardy's Wessex novels. The Wessex novels, when Thomas Hardy wrote his Wessex novels, well, it's an imaginary space which he created, and so did William Faulkner when he created his Yaknapatawa County. It is based on Lafayette County in Mississippi, but which doesn't have a real physical existence. And Mark Twain's Mississippi Delta, and Sarah Owen Jewels, and Robert Frost, New England. So we associate this term local color writing with the Sarah Owen Jewels and Robert Frost, because when they wrote about a particular place, namely New England. So those who are very familiar with the Robert Frost poems or Sarah Owen Jewels novels, you know what it means to bring local color into your text. So now, when you talk about local color, you need to necessarily talk about local knowledge. How a writer can bring forth local color into his or her work. It abounds in local knowledge of a particular place, right? Knowledge of, right, the flora, the fauna, the wind, right? Everything about the landscape. Okay, so if you remember those poems, After Apple Picking by Robert Frost, or Mending Wall, are the most familiar poem, right? What is that? Miles to Go Before I Sleep, right? Okay, so now all these poems, look at Robert Frost. New England comes alive. It is full of local color. It abounds in local knowledge, and it is full of localist rhetoric. I have forgotten to mention that. It is full of localist rhetoric. Now, back here, when Vairamuthu wrote Karvachi Kavyam, right? Or when Cruz, he wrote Arlisu Ulagam. He wrote a Tamil novel which won the Sahitya Akademi prize. Okay, it is all about people living near the sea coast. Okay, so or when Vairamuthu writes about a particular place, it is all about the place where you find black cotton soil, all right, and the place, Karisal Kadu, right? Even he has written even a short epic about that. full of local knowledge, local color. What is it about? It is about a place. So now it's about a space. Okay. Now remember, when Mikhail Bakhtin, when he used the term chronotope, he uses chrono, that is time, as well as toe. Now, according to Bakhtin, now what is this chronotope? According to him, it is a constitutive category. Chronotope is a constitutive category of literature. That is, you need to place, sorry for using the term, you need to place a piece of literature, what we call in a locale. When we analyze a novel, we talk about a locale, a particular place. So now it is a feature of any piece of literature, time and space. Time and space, they go together. So it is a constitutive category according to Mikhail Bakhtin. But remember, this whole concept of utopia, no place, utopia, no place. Perhaps it's an ideal place. When Thomas More wrote his Utopia in 1516 in Latin, later it was translated into English, he was talking about people living in a very imaginary land. Remember, we have borrowed, even modern day economists and modern day social thinkers have borrowed many concepts from Thomas More's Utopia. Even working for this 8 hours a day and taking rest during weekend and so many things, they have been borrowed. And today in the Western countries, they have created an affluent society based on Thomas More's economic thought found in Utopia, that is universal basic income. You may have heard of UBI, universal basic income. It doesn't make a distinction between a person who works in a front office, in a shop, or a doctor or a carpenter, because they are assured of minimum wages and basic income. So they have managed to create an affluent society, borrowing certain thoughts from Thomas More's Utopia. At one time, it was thought of as a not so realizable world, but it can happen. Then Samuel Butler's Erewhon, I'm not going into it. Of course, when George Orwell's 1984, we do not know whether to call it a utopia or dystopia. And going by the way the nations are imposing restriction on free speech, restriction on freedom of people. Yeah, 1984 like situation can happen in any part of the world. Okay, right. And we also use, we borrow terms and space as a critical concept. Okay, now I want to mention Foucault here. He has written this small, a few pages. The article runs to a few pages. He talks about the space outside. That is outside our living space, where we talk about that humans can live. And he uses the term heterotopia. Utopia or top, again a place. For instance, he talks about crisis heterotopia. Today, you find many people getting hospitalized because of infection. So he calls hospital a crisis heterotopia. When you are under crisis, you cannot be called a normal person. You become an abnormal person, so you cannot live among the so-called normal people, and you have to be quarantined or necessarily transported to a place where you are physically separated from others. For him, it's not only a hospital, but also other places like the places meant for people who are called mentally challenged. They are kept in asylums. We call them asylums. So as an asylum is a heterotopia for him. A prison or a correction facility is also a heterotopia for him, because those people are not normal. We brand them as criminals. We brand them as mentally challenged. So even within our homes, he says, people used to have crisis heterotopias. So even old people who are very old, look at them. Even old age homes, he talks of as crisis heterotopia. And within our homes, we have created places for the sick, places for the old, even places for menstruating women. So even menstruation is regarded as a crisis according to Foucault, and they are separated, and they used to be separated. And again, he further divides heterotopias of deviation and curious heterotopias. So, for example, we talk about the army barracks or a boarding school where children are given food and they are given lodging, where students stay in hostels, which he calls heterotopia. It may be a home away from home, as many of these institutions claim, but still it is a deviation, heterotopia of deviation. So then he talks about many curious heterotopia. For instance, a train or a bus or even an aircraft or even a cruise ship. According to him, it is a space which moves within a space. So now look at a train, right? It is a space, a huge space with multiple compartments and so on. It moves, and interestingly enough, it's a curious heterotopia because we ourselves can move within that space. Even when the train, let us say, it travels at a speed of 120 kilometers per hour, it is a moving space. Or an aircraft which travels at 930, a jet aircraft that travels at 930 kilometers per hour, it is a space that moves. And you can also move within a space, a curious heterotopia. For him, a cemetery is one such curious heterotopia, a museum is one such curious heterotopia, and so on. Then finally he says, when you look at yourself, when you look at your own image in a mirror, you see a space within. Where does it, does it have a physical existence? No. Or if you keep another mirror behind you, you will see a place within a place, within a place, and within a place. It goes endlessly. Interesting. Go and read the concept of heterotopia by Foucault. It will make an interesting read. So now, in literature, we have this distinct notion of magical realism. Now, this magical realism, it breaks all these boundaries. Where does this space exist? It a wonderful mode, according to Salman Rushdie, to explore and transgress the boundaries which we know of. Our ontological, that is our existential boundary, our political boundary, and even geographical boundary. So when Gabriel Garcia Marquez writes his 100 Years of Solitude, or any of his works, where he has introduced this concept of magical realism, it challenges our dichotomous thinking, our thinking of mind and body, our spirit and matter, life and death, real and imaginary, and self and other. So all these boundaries are blurred and they are refashioned by this magical realist writers. So sometimes we find that even in children's literature too. But when you try to blur these boundaries and create or weave a new magical land, you also understand they are subversive. These texts are subversive. They talk about an in-betweenness. Okay, so now look at Jack and the Beanstalk, a story, a piece of children's fiction. How do you climb to the heavens? Just using the beanstalk? Can you go on climbing? Is it a possibility? Or can you levitate? Can you defy gravity? No. Well, this kind of challenging the reality, it happens not only in novels, but even in films. You watch any of these action-oriented Tamil films where you find the hero defying gravity and doing stunts which cannot be believed. So it is a willing suspension of disbelief, no doubt about it. But in that process, a new world, a new space is created. The space where such things are possible, right? Now, people call this scenes as hallucinatory scenes and events. And the realm of fantastic or the realm of phantasmagoric characters. So look at the novel Metamorphosis. And suddenly, a human being turns into a beetle. Can it happen? Now, a human being turning into a beetle. Overnight, you turn into a beetle and you fall from your bed with all your legs flailing. It is nauseating, but the writer has succeeded, as the title itself suggests. The character metamorphoses into a figure which he is not. The phantasmagoric character. Well, you watch any of those fantastic, you read any of these fantastic novels, whether by J.R.R. Tolkien or by J.K. Rowling's. In J.K. Rowling's, at least the demarcation between the magical realm and the world in which we live as a normal world is easy to distinguish. You have to go to a particular platform on the railway station to be transported into a magical world. Where, or in C.S. Lewis Narnia series, you have to enter into a wardrobe to be transported into another world, another space altogether. So now, Elijah Carpentier, he calls this magical realm or creation of this magical realm as territorialization of the imaginary. What appears to be fantastic in human thinking, say, this is not something new. When Edmund Spenser wrote his Fairy Queen, for the first time he employed the term fairy and even fairyland. When you go through that work, or even you go back in time to Beowulf, where you come across all those fantastic creatures. So now he calls that territorialization of the imaginary. The things that are imagined, they have no place in the world which we know of. So you give them a territory, you give them a living space, and he calls that territorialization of the imaginary. What is being called fantastic in human mind, they are given shape and significance, and they are transported to what we understand as our terrestrial world, our own human territory. So, according to Franz Rode, who used the term, who coined the term magical realism, the metamorphosis of space to be a primary source of counter-realism. So he calls magical realism as counter-realism. If you happen to read science fiction and children's literature, of course, you would come across different realms of and space. and we talk of them today as alternative realities or parallel universe. So this parallel universe exists somewhere, or people use or talk of multiverse even today. So what we understand as a reality, what we believe to be real, cannot be real, and that is an alternative reality. That people talk about the reality that which we face today or which we live in today as an alternative reality for the world afflicted by the pandemic. Okay, then you have this ecological space. Now, the ecological space, I want to quote Barry Lopez. It is easier and simpler, but very clear. He talks about the interior and exterior landscape. The exterior landscape, simply, it refers to the one outside the self, and the interior landscape, which refers to one within a person. Well, it is easy, the ecological space. And today, we talk of cultural geography. That is, the ancient Tamils had this cultural geography, right? Each distinct region has its own gods, deities, way of living, vocation, and so on. So, anthropogeographers, they believe that environments shape cultures, not that we construct or we produce culture. The environment also plays a crucial role in shaping culture, our attitude towards life, our worldview. They are all shaped by the environment in which we live. And humans are treated simply as the dwellers in the land. So, to become a dweller in the land, it calls for a distinct and clear understanding of the place that one inhabits, especially its soil, the rocks, the winds, the water, insects, birds, animals, and of course, the seasons and the climate changes. So, we employ terms like politics of place and even terrain of consciousness. Right? Now, there are two things: consciousness of the terrain and terrain of consciousness. Now, what is this terrain of consciousness that is within us? And this consciousness itself becomes aware of the terrain in which it inhabits and in which it lives. So now we call this a regional knowledge. Now look at the terms that I have mentioned at the bottom. Tinai. Tinai is a term from ancient Tamil classic, Tolkapian. Right, it talks about at least 7 distinct Tinais, but we'll confine ourselves to 5 of those: Kurunji, Mullai, Marudam, Neidal, Palai. Now, Kurunji, this is hill and adjoining regions. That is called Kurunji because it's named after a particular flower. It is a Kurunji flower which blooms once in 12 years on top of the hills. Then Mullai, right? This is forest and the region of forest. It is named after one particular climber, that is Mullai. Then Marudam, that is the flatlands, the lands where we grow our paddy, where we grow our cereals and grains. That is Marudam, where agricultural activities take place on a large scale, where agricultural communities are developed over thousands of years on the banks of rivers and so on. That is Marudam. Then Neidal, that is life on the seaside, right? And people, how they have made a living by making a living out of the sea and its products. Okay, so they have a distinct lifestyle, and even the flora is different, and many such things. So then any land could turn into a desert, that is Palai. Kurunji, the hilly region can turn into a desert. The forest region can turn into a desert. The Marudam region can turn into a desert. So, or even the Natal region can turn into a desert. So, the ecological space. Now, I want to focus your attention on this particular term, abandoned village. What happened was, during the 19th century beginning, people started migrating on a large scale to urban centers because of jobs, because of trading activities, and because of economic activities which produce wealth in cities. So many villages were abandoned. Say, villages could be abandoned because of war, or look at Oliver Goldsmith's deserted village, right? It could be because of war, it could be because of famine, it could be because of, any of those diseases or endemic prone regions where people would run away, they would abandon the place. Say, I read elsewhere, when polio was widespread, we didn't find a vaccine for that. In Australia, people ran to the mountainous places. And some people vacated Australian mainland and ran away to Tasmania to escape. Most of the villages were abandoned. Now today, you come across such abandoned towns, maybe after a forest fire, after floods, or even after what we call pollution. And there are factories which remain for 10 years, 50 years. You can see some of these abandoned villages closer to places near one in Badia, Ambo, where the land was destroyed because of large-scale pollution of underground water and a large-scale desertification because of letting out untreated effluents on land. Right? We call them abandoned village. Okay. Now, we'll move on to the next one, that is the techno space. Now, I'll pause on quickly. This is a distinct space and quite different from others, which Jacques Laffitte, he calls mechanology. Mechanology. Okay. Pardon my pronunciation. Mechanology. Yeah, general science, which talks about technical devices and systems, and it talks about exploring the material reality, knowledge, and social space. So today, today we talk about technologization. Some 40 years ago, we talked about mechanization. Now, mechanization of farming activities. That today, even we talk about banking system or any other system. Say, the other day I had to travel from Tiruchirappalli to Thoothukudi a week ago because of a death in the family. Well, I had to go and download a e-registration. Then I had to get it stored on my mobile phone. Then even all those things I have to do before I venture out of my district, because I know I can be tracked, right? I can be tracked, and my mobile phone, in which I have to keep all those things. So now, what I find is I'm dependent on this small instrument or this gadget called mobile phone for all my day-to-day activities. Very soon we are going to face what we call Internet of Things. And on that day, we'll understand what we mean by technospace. We are going to have even a whole home. Everything is under technology. Okay? And we may be forced to create rooms which is free from Wi-Fi connection. Because the entire home is going to be this space will turn into a techno space. The walls can read your mind, and even the shower bath can read what your the amount of heat in the water that you want to take bath. right? It can read depending on the day, depending on the weather, and depending on your body. Everything is going to be mechanized. Everything, 26% of the homes in the West, they have been built like this. And very soon, we'll have such homes here too. So even our home will be converted into a techno space. Okay, I'll skip this thought on technological determinism. The next one is what we call cyberspace. So I know I'm talking about too many things. As I warned you during the beginning of my lecture, there's going to be an information overload, but I cannot help it because I want to make it clear to you what space is all about. When you examine a particular text and from which standpoint you can examine a text, so from a social space or from a techno space or from cyberspace or from any of these spaces. So when he wrote this work, William Gibson, he wrote this work called Neuromancer, where he coined the term to describe a virtual landscape. Today we talk about virtual reality or virtual classrooms and even virtual labs. So people in the Department of Chemistry, people in the Department of Physics, they are exploring the possibility of creating virtual labs where students, not the physical labs which they are familiar with. So a virtual landscape made up of all the information in the world. So according to him, cyberspace is something what he calls disembodied consciousness. Now, embodied consciousness, but this is disembodied consciousness by jacking into the network. And we all get jacked into network. Otherwise, we go mad. Now, right from the time we wake up, before we go to bed, we are into the network. And this landscape, which we move into, is a battleground over the ownership of and access of data, according to him. Now, today we are talking about social media. Unfortunately, we didn't talk about social media. It's a different battleground altogether. It could be a ideological battleground, or it could be a what we call a social battleground, a political battleground, and so on. And this is according to William Gibson. And this cyberspace can be contrasted with John Perry Barlow's concept of cyberspace. He simply talks about network computing. So I told you about this battlegrounds, and they change. I'll talk about it before I close. Then there is something called pictorial space. So now all those painted pictures are the pictures that you see on a huge canvas, where you come across a picture tells a story. We even talk about a painting as poetry, right? A sculpture as poetry. Why? It reflects the mind of the painter, and for the observer, a connoisseur, or an art lover, it gives multiple meanings. Leonardo da Vinci, he called space a mental thing. Right? According to him, space is a mental thing. It's not a physical thing. So when you look at a particular piece of painting, what runs in your mind matters. It's not exactly what you see there, what it triggers on your mind, the emotion it triggers, the feeling it triggers, the thoughts it triggers, it matters. So I'll just give you these two examples. One is Cubism, that is Picasso's space of the girls of Amelia. It is full of jagged shapes. I'll just show you the picture. And this is a painting by Picasso, The Bombing of Guernica. So Guernica is a town when there was a civil war in Spain between the forces of Franco and others, and thus he bombed his own people. So this is a picture. Take a look at the picture. Here is a human figure. See, there are geometrical shapes. So you can see something like a right angular triangle here, right? You can see a scaling triangle, right? An isosceles triangle, whatever it is, many geographical shapes. Now, here you look at a horse, which is in the throes of pain, right? The cattle, bulbs, right? Now, here is a figure which is lying prone on the ground. Maybe here is a figure whom you find because of wounds received or injuries received. It is a complicated one, but you take a look at the picture for a while. It is a pictorial space. It is something, the idea, the thought, the emotions and feelings, they are framed. They are neatly framed. Okay, now take a look at this other one. The 5 prostitutes of Amigo. Some people call this. You've come across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 figures. Now, all the geometrical shapes that you can find, right? So, as Da Vinci calls what it does to you when you take a look at a picture of this kind. Then we'll move on to surrealistic painting. This is also a pictorial space, a very interesting space, so to speak. Now, surrealism, as we understand today, it is all about the things that are compressed in your mind. There are different layers, say, to use a Freudian term. It is all about condensation, right? Now, many things are condensed, right? And they produce dreams and they produce images, now, which are simply surrealistic. And this is an inner space, which we need to decode. Now, here you come across a melting wall clock, right? A tree on a tabletop, denuded of its leaves. It looks like a simple hill on a mountain, which is almost collapsing. And look at all the figures that you find. I'm not going to explain each one of them, but take a look. For me, it's not simply melting wall clock, as someone puts it. For me, it appears like a piece of leather, right? The outer part, which appears like a wall clock, right? Which is made to hang, or even a piece of cloth. This looks like even a clothesline, but it happens to be a branch of a tree. So now look at the distinct colors here. So the persistence of memory, and here also the external world, which is synthesized with the internal world, and you create a world. This space is also distinct, and he calls this hand-painted dream photograph. Salvador Dali calls this hand-painted dream photograph, and the pictorial space is different. Then finally, you have this ideological space. Of course, when I started the lecture, I made a mention of this ideal space and this ideological space. And ideology is basically a subjective thought construct. Now, rather than an objective response to economic circumstances, many people believe ideology is an objective response to economic circumstances, like the Marxian ideology or any other ideology. Basically, it's a subjective thought construct. And according to Althusser, say, ideology, right, it interpellates or it addresses human beings, right? Now, Louis Althusser, he talks about a repressive state apparatus as well as ideological state apparatus. and it falls into 8 different spheres. Now, using these spheres, a state tries to promote its ideology through the religious sphere, through the educational sphere, family sphere, and even the legal sphere and political sphere. And also includes the trade union sphere, because a trade union consists of people, and people whose thoughts can be manipulated, whose thoughts can be, in whom thoughts can be indoctrinated, or ideologies can be indoctrinated, the trade union sphere, communication sphere, and cultural sphere. So, though he uses the term state apparatus, obviously it refers to a state. So, the police, military, paramilitary, they are called the repressive state apparatuses. But these are all ideological state apparatus. Now, we should be promoting the idea of democracy. We should be promoting the idea of secularism. We should be promoting the idea of republicanism through these state apparatuses. Now, this is an invisible one, right? The ideological space. We cannot say they exist in textbooks or in the lectures given by teachers and professors, okay, or in our religious observations, or within our families, or the legal system which promotes this ideology, the state ideology, or so on. And in political spheres, certainly, right? So now this ideological space is also a distinct space, and most of them always may refer to them. But finally, I come to the last part of it. This is the cosmic space, what we call the outer space, beyond our Earth, beyond our planet. So it is celestial. Okay, now unlike the terrestrial. And obviously I'm leaving out another space, which is the sea, the oceans, right? Because for me, I have no time to discuss that. That is a distinct region. And before I end, I want to talk about just for a couple of minutes so that I can take up questions from you. The Greeks talked about the crystal spheres. So, and according to them, these crystal spheres, they progressively they move outwards. Okay, the Greeks had a different one, and you know Ptolemy's idea that Earth was at the center. It was a geocentric view. Then with the Copernicus, it changed into heliocentric, talking about the sun at the center, which is a heliocentric view. But later, all those things changed in the 20th century when we started using telescopes, and thanks to the theory of relativity and so on, we had theories like Big Bang theory, we had something like steady state theory, and so on, which tried to map the universe, right, and try to give an explanation for the space which is beyond our human understanding, beyond our ability to think. For instance, we do not know where space ends. If it ends at a particular point, beyond that, what exists? Okay, we are not able to think about time or space. We simply say spatio-temporal continuum. Well, we try to limit space so that we humans can understand, and we talk about, we draw imaginary boundaries, we draw maps, and we say this is a galaxy, this is a Milky Way galaxy in which our own solar system exists, or the next galaxy is the Andromeda galaxy. Then we also talk about, you know, billions of galaxies and so on. And we also talk about billions of years, you know, and so on. Just read that about the Hubble's constant and so on. This is about the cosmic space, that is the world beyond our own imagination, right? Thank you. So it is all about space. And what I have given us, as I told you in the beginning, an inventory of spaces. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. If there are questions.
So, thank you, sir. That was a profuse, illuminating lecture. Participants, if you have questions, you could directly unmute your mic and ask, sir.
Let me also take a look at the chat box. Other questions?
Pretty ma'am, you may read from the chat box.
So I'll read it from the chat box.
Okay.
So there is this question from Ms. Jyoti. She asks, is there any space-related themes in the wasteland?
Space? Now, could you please repeat the question? I missed out the second part.
Related themes in the wasteland.
Wasteland.
So is there any space-related themes in the wasteland?
Themes in the wasteland. You mean the
Yes, sir.
poem by T.S. Eliot?
Yes, sir.
Well, as we all know,
Yes, sir.
T.S. Eliot his poem was published in 1922. He was writing after the end of the World War I. So Europe was completely devastated. So for the first time, we know about the trench warfare, we know about the large-scale use of machine guns and so on. And again, a large-scale use of gunpowder, and we all know of that. So it was a new wasteland. Europe lay wasted. And again, the belief in God, belief in religion also was shattered. So what human beings inherited at that point in time was a land that lays waste. Okay, so that's what you find, like all those things, the jetsam and flotsam floating on even River Thames. The river is polluted, unlike the River Thames that is mentioned in Edmund Spencer's poem, where he says, "Sweet Thames, run sweetly on." He was talking about a modern wasteland. Well, these wastelands are created by us and they are with us. Look at the polluted rivers, look at the polluted ponds and lakes. Well, they are outside of us. Now, within us, the mind that is that doesn't know humanity, that doesn't, when people talked about a war to end all wars, but they fought the Second World War also. Okay, so now even our mind turns into a desert. Okay, well, finally he talks about Shanti, peace and things like that. Okay, and even he quotes from Indian Upanishads, right? And things like that. We know that. But the point is also about hope, where he talks about a gust of wind. It is all about fragmentation of our lives, a fragmentation of our thinking, fragmentation of our land, fragmentation of peace. There are so many things. So that was the landscape, that was the land that was there in Europe and other parts of the world, which was both external as well as, which was both exterior as well as interior. Yeah. I do not know whether I have answered. That is about the land which was in existence there. Yeah. When space can be given to, yeah, we are talking about the migrant space. Okay. So we also talk about diasporic space and colonial space and post-colonial space, which of course I forgot to mention. Now, when the colonizers, say, when they went and colonized nations, not only the English, but also the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and others, when they colonized other parts of the world, they added just wealth to the crown and land to the crown. So it was an occupied land, a conquered land, and it was purely a colonial space. After independence, we talk about a post-colonial space. Post-colonial space includes nations.
Hello.
Yeah. Post-colonial space includes lands which have countries which have become what we call attained self-determination or have become free, and they have a new constitution, they have a new they may have a hybrid language or a new way of living or a new ideology to govern them and so on. So that is the post-colonial space. The migrant space, okay. Now, this is a very precarious space, whichever country you migrate to. And when you migrate to a particular land, and if you belong to a particular race, and if you are different from them, see, I became acutely aware of the color of my skin when I found myself in the company of so many white people. Once I was traveling in a tram, right, in Melbourne, Australia. So the whole tram was filled with, whites. I was the one lonely non-white. For the first time, I became acutely conscious of the color of my skin. I was different from others. So when a migrant goes and occupies a particular space, right, either as a political migrant or as a laborer, or see, there are so many of our migrants who live in Dubai, Muscat, and all other places. They create a space for themselves, which is invariably and inevitably a cosmopolitan space. Is there any connection?
The two people have raised their hands.
Economics dealing of space and space, which is eco-critical dealing of space. Well, now eco-criticism talks about the land which has lost its health, right? We talk about land that has lost its pristine nature or pristine beauty, and that has been converted into a polluted land, right? Now, eco-criticism is basically about the human intervention or the intervention of our human culture, which has completely transformed them and devastated them and converted this ecological space into something which is non-livable, not only for human beings but also for other species. Okay, that our habitats are destroyed. So it talks about yes, eco-criticism talks about such a space. Now I have to really crane my neck and don't move that. An impact on the demographic. So about migration. 1 second, just don't move the politics. And what about the existential dilemma related to kind of politics and global migration? Okay, I'll talk about global migration and what happens. So now you talk about migration of people to, for instance, the Sri Lankan Tamils migrated in large numbers to Canada in the 1980s. Now, it has a sizable Tamil population, Sri Lanka Tamil population living in Canada. I was talking to a Canadian Tamil, and he was telling me it's high time we Canadian Tamils started talking about not only this 4 distinct regions, right, like the Kurunji, Mullai, Marugam, Neidal. He said we have to create something called Panithine. Ice, snow between people of Tamil origin, have to live with today. But people in Sri Lanka or in Tamil Nadu, namakku therinjala only fog, right, or mist. But there, now they have created this migrant population. They have created their own living space in the vast Canadian arid regions filled with the snow, right? So they're talking about one more thing. Okay, that is different. But migration, I think I had given a lecture on migration last year, right, to Queen's Mary's College, where I had discussed all these things at length. Now, the Jewish migration, which resulted in the extermination of Jews or Holocaust, the racial divide runs deep even now in Europe. So, in spite of all the tall claims about equality and racial equality and so on, race is a categorical identity. And the religious practices of people. Today, it has produced right-wing politicians in Europe. And Nazism is trying to make a comeback. Okay, so many things are happening in Europe. If you are going to watch Europe closely, you will realize large-scale migration of population from one region to another. It creates social tension in those regions. But in certain regions, it creates a cosmopolitan culture. It's a good cosmopolitanism in big cities and elsewhere, but in certain places, it creates tension. Look at the Muslim migrants from Burma into Bangladesh or into border states of India. It creates a lot of social tension. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
There are 2 people have raised their questions.
Yeah.
So I just request Dr. V.S. Joseph Albert to raise his question to our resource person.
Yeah.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
I request Dr. V.S. Joseph Albert to post his question to the resource person.
Congratulations, first of all, Dr. Bennett, on having delivered a very, very informative lecture, which will help all the research guides in our department and also the research scholars and the academicians and friends in other institutions. As most of the participants have shared in their chat box, a very, very informative lecture. And this kind of lecture is a model lecture for many resource persons during this online session. I would like you to reflect on this particular issue. That is, since you have talked about ideological space, literary space, from historical point of view, beginning with Edmund Spencer, now, how do you accommodate the concept of space in Benedict Anderson's imagined communities and Homi K. Bhabha's third space?
Yeah, okay. I know I have left out these 2 people. Now, so now today we talk about, say, our mind that has been conditioned into thinking, into dichotomous thinking for a long time. That is the self and the other. Now, whether it comes to the gender difference, the male-female divide, right? Black and white, rich and poor, right? Or even when it comes to categorization of people's sexual orientation as heterosexual orientation as normal, or anything that is related to something like the LGBT. Okay, we are not able to accommodate them as normal beings in our midst, and they occupy a different space altogether. And look at the hybrid communities that live in different parts of the world. Okay, whether you are a Chicano in America, for instance, whether if you are a Chicano or a mestizo, that you belong to a mixed breed of people, and you have that in betweenness. You neither belong to this group nor you belong to that group. So you are abandoned by both the groups. So now, then you talk about communities, right? Communities living in different parts of the globe and different. I mean, whenever we discuss Europe and North America as standard or as a normal. Now we talk about. So now communities are spread. Now, say when Benjamin Franklin talked about the two nations. I think it was Franklin, right? In the 19th century, he talked about England being two nations. He was talking about the rich and poor. It is a class-ridden society. But in the next 60 years, see, there was a new class. They simply called them the Nouveau Rich, the newly rich. It is a third group, right? And the traditionally rich and the working class. They were used to that. Say, like the old manorial barons and the serfs. So now suddenly, the third group, when it came into existence, the Nouveau Rich, they were called the newly rich. They were degraded. They had the money, they had the wealth, but they didn't belong to either of these groups. They were branded as Nouveau Rich. Okay. So now, as time passed, it always happens. No. Okay, the third group. Okay, it could be a hybrid community, or it could be the new middle class or the Nouveau Rich, as we call them. It belongs to class, right? Or people who use even a hybrid language, like the people in the Caribbean, right? People who use a language which is neither English nor the local one, right? We use them as a rotten English, and even novels were written in rotten English. So now today we live in a world where the voice is for integrating all of them with the mainstream way of life. Say, the blacks still, after having a president, of course, who was a kind of a mixed breed, Obama, right? Then you find still the African Americans talking about Black Lives Matter. Now, they fought a civil war between 1861 to 1865. Then in 1963, there was a civil rights movement, Martin Luther. Then Barack Obama becomes the president in 2008. Well, after all this, still people are talking about Black Lives Matter. So now that movement interestingly brought together, why am I mentioning this? It interestingly brought together all kinds of these groups which inhabit the third space, right, or any other space together, asking for equal rights, demanding respect and honor to live among communities and societies as a group, not as a distinct group, but as a group with its own freedom of thinking, with its own freedom of living. Okay, so now it's easy to sit and theorize. Well, about this imagined communities, right? We are talking about communities, especially novelists. They are talking about when they write cosmopolitan novels, they are writing about jet setters. People move from continent to continent, continent hoppers, right? Or jet age nomads, as I call them. They are called jet age nomads. They don't belong anywhere, and they have their own living space. It could be Singapore today, tomorrow it could be London, and maybe 20 years from now, that could be a small village near Madurai or near Tirunelveli. Okay, so now, what kind of life did they live? What kind of food did they eat? What kind of people did they mingle with? What kind of community did they identify themselves with? So today, the world is full of such people. And thanks to our communication system, thanks to our easy movement from continent to continent, so these so-called traditional barriers that communities erected to protect their own culture or protect their own civilization, they are crumbling. Not only because of movement of people from one place to another, from one continent to another, and because of media, aided by media, and the culture promoted by media and internet, our concepts of communities are changing. So certainly in the urban areas, we talk about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we discussed about, at length the communities emerging in urban centers. Or, here in India, caste is a very important category in identity politics. So, intercaste marriages, interreligious marriages, well, they all took place between the 1980s and 2000. Even those things are threatened today. So, we all dream about building an imaginary community, a cosmopolitan global citizen ship, and we also dream about one world with, thanks to the climate change and global warming, how our lives are united, and thanks to the global commerce, how our economies go report of growth of different level in different countries, they are also united. And this concept of race, this concept of sexual orientation or sexual preference, this concept of, or simply put, any categorization, it defies our human thinking. And I do not know how communities will emerge after this pandemic, and we have to wait and see. So these are all artificial barriers. Talking about first space, say, when the third world collapsed, see, people talked about the first world, the NATO group of nations, the rich European nations. Then they talked about the Warsaw Pact nations, the communist nations. Then the third world countries. Till 1980s, we talked about. These are all imagined communities. Okay. Then suddenly, the second world collapsed. Right. With the fall of the Berlin Wall and with the arrival of Gorbachev, it collapsed. So it left us with only the third world. Now today, there is nothing called the third world. Today we have only two worlds. So we talk about developed nations and developing nations. That's all. I think even that distinction will collapse soon, because as nations move forward, many of these distinctions, because it all belongs to our imagination. And these worlds that we have created are artificially created. And I don't think it is possible to have such spaces. I don't know, sir, whether I have answered your question. So when we talk about the gender distinction, the arrival of the third gender and things like that, I think all these are collapsing. And perhaps the pandemic is a great social leveler. I do not know.
Yeah, excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Can I go ahead?
Yes.
I'd like to thank Dr. Bennett personally, as he is my teacher and he's always been my mentor. And the discussions are going well. And there have been several other questions, but unfortunately we are running short of time. We will take two questions alone. One from...
Kindly read out those questions. I'm not able to see those questions.
Yeah, I mean, two people have raised their hands. I think the rest of the questions can be forwarded to Dr. Bennett's mail ID. Or if people want, maybe we can have another 10 to 15 minutes of discussion.
Okay.
I think Ms. Madhuchanda can ask a question. Madhuchanda can ask a question. You can unmute yourself. You may ask your question. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. It was a marvelous and such an eye-opening lecture. Thank you very much. My question really goes back to your idea of space regarding magic realism. And you were talking about the fact that in magic realist texts, what happens with the space is that the binary opposition, the idea of a binary opposition collapses or dismantles. So I was wondering, sir, if there is any, if we can in any way draw a comparison between this dismantling of binary opposition in magic realist texts to our Upanishadic philosophy, and I'm specifically thinking about Rabindranath Tagore.
No, which philosophy?
Upanishadic philosophy.
Okay. Now, see, the Upanishads. See, which thought exactly are you talking about?
Okay, I'm talking about the idea of Brahma and Atma, which also leads to this idea that there is no chasm between life and death, really.
Okay, yeah. When you talk about multiple births and
yes.
Well, when you talk about the Atman joining the Paramatma at the end. Okay, so, in the Upanishadic philosophy, there is nothing called heaven or hell, unlike the Western philosophy. So in the Western philosophy, again, there is this dichotomous thinking. There is something called the good and the evil. Okay. So now it is a long run battle between the good and evil, God and Satan, including the ancient Zen Avastha. It talks about Ahura Ben Mazda and Ahirman. Ahura Ben Mazda is the good and Ahirman is the evil. Then God and the Satan in the Christian, Judeo-Islamic religions. So the concept of evil is very clear in the Western religious philosophy. But whereas here in our Indian philosophy, there is nothing called the evil as such. So there is evil, fine, but your soul has the ultimate. It enjoys such a liberty to purify itself by taking multiple births. So ultimately, maybe at the end of your 7th birth, let us say, the soul itself is purified and it joins the Paramatma. The Atma joins the Paramatma. So now, then it becomes a single whole, a unified whole. And even the distinction between the binary distinction between Atma and the Paramatma also collapses. Okay, so if the Atma joins the Paramatma and it becomes part of Paramatma, not as a distinct one, because it becomes part of a unified whole. Okay, so now this thinking is very clear. The Upanishad thoughts are very clear. So, and again, let's consider it religious philosophy. It's very clear that the soul goes, from one step to another, one step to another, one step to another, or whether it takes what we call metempsychosis or multiple births. So, and there is this definite, there is this interesting concept of evil comes in support of evil. Whatever you regard as evil, if you think killing as evil, that is also justified in Indian philosophy to establish dharma. In order to establish dharma, you can resort to adharma also. So where is the distinction between adharma and dharma then? That also collapses.
Right.
Okay. So remember the talk between Lord Krishna and Arjuna?
Arjuna, yeah.
Yeah, before the start of the war, because he is able to foresee deaths and killing. But Lord Krishna justifies that. Yes? Even if it's going to result in killings and deaths of friends or relatives and, some of the great kings, but it is justified in order to establish dharma. If you think killing is adharma, right? So
yes.
That kind of thinking is not present here. I do not know whether I have answered this.
No, yeah, that is, yeah, absolutely, sir. No, I was just wondering if magic realism takes a similar approach when you are talking about the dismantling
it transgresses all the traditional concept of reality. Okay, see, look at the character just ascending to heaven in 100 years of salary. So the last time it happened was in the Bible when Prophet Elijah he ascended into heaven. Okay, so here is a character ascending into heaven, not going through the normal death, and burial in a casket and things like that, or even someone levitating. Okay, now remember in one of the novels by Salman Rushdie, so I think where he talks about thousands of snakes traveling subterranean and surfacing near a tent in Kashmir and biting Colonel Kuchwa. I mean, as if there was an underground highway system where snakes can move. Snakes can burrow into the ground, but they cannot travel underground as if it were a railway system or things like that. But still believe in that. Okay. So at some point we keep our reason aside, our rationality aside. Okay, and we start believing that. And when it comes in a novel of social realism, it talks about Kashmir and things like that. So when you come across a piece of description like this, for a moment you are jolted, but still you accept it as part of your social realistics. That's what magical realism does.
Right.
True exaggeration.
Right.
Exaggeration.
Right. Yeah. So it dismantles, but not in the same way as the Upanishads do.
Yes, you're right.
Right. Thank you so much, sir.
Another person is Grishma. I'm unmuting Ms. Grishma. She can ask a question.
Thank you, organizers, and first of all, thank you, Dr. Bennett, sir, for this amazing and insightful session. Sir, I'm just going to ask you one question. That can you please explain how psychogeography and this idea of space is related?
Psychogeography. Okay, right. Now, say when Freud made use of the term topology, right, he was borrowing from the concept of, it was an analogous term that he was trying to develop from geography. He used the term topology. Well, psychogeography, that is the existence of the external world in your mind. Or, as the surrealists say, I think I showed you a painting of the surrealists. It is the external world and your inner world, they come together and they get condensed in a form. Say, it is multi-layered, no doubt. Your psychical apparatus is multi-layered, but they all get condensed. And they get so condensed, it becomes at some point for you to distinguish one from the other. Okay, so the Canadians are known for saying the land outside and the land in your mind. If you can exist, if you can survive, right? First, your survival has to come here before you face the brutal winters or the temperatures when they drop down to -40 or things like that. In order to survive there, you have to have the courage to survive here. So now, when I talk about psychogeography, this mind has its own impressions of this world. It has its own impressions of the society in which we live. It has its own space. It has its own time. So now this is different from the biological time. Okay, different from the biological time. See, many people who are in the 50s and 60s, you can hear them talking about you can hear them talking like a 16-year-old girl or a 20-year-old boy, because biologically they have grown, but that is time, right? But they occupy in their mind space, right? Because their body, they're conscious of their body, so growing old, but they find it difficult to accept it, and they remain the same person as they are. Okay. Leave that. Psychogeography, as we understand it today, it is all about the presence of the external in the interior. How it shapes. Say, for example, the Afghans are a very tough lot. Okay, I think that will explain this example. Many Afghans are warlike, and they are all fighters. They fight among themselves, they fight among their own tribes, right? They fight against the invaders and so on. It is something characteristic, it is something of an important characteristic of their land. The land itself is like that. Okay, they are all survivors. It had seen so many invading forces passing through Afghanistan, into Pakistan, and to India, and so on. And it had seen conquerors, it had seen invaders, and the people are as tough as the land, right? And it's an empty, barren land, mostly. So that affects their mind also. It all depends on where you live, which part of the world you live, and what kind of mind you develop, because the land peters into your mind. Your living space peters into your mind. And it develops a kind of thinking, it develops a kind of attitude, and it develops a kind of worldview. Yeah.
So 2 other people have raised their hands.
Yeah.
Can they ask questions?
I'll take only 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay then. Ms. Munishwari, she can ask a question if she's there. There were 2 other people.
Okay.
I think they have now lowered their hands. Grishma, I think you have.
Sir, I just had one more thing. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sir, yes. Sir, relating to psychogeography, can we approach the studies with the theory of Edward Soya?
No, I haven't read Edward Soya. I should.
Third space.
Yeah.
And sir, can you please suggest me some appropriate theory that we can look upon psychogeography and space?
See, I have a reading list. Perhaps I think I can send you a reading list. Okay. So,
okay, sir, can I have your email?
The mail ID is there in the chat box. The mail ID is there in the chat box. I have already shared.
Okay. I will send you a reading list which runs to nearly 70 or 80 books. Okay.
Okay, sir. I'll write it.
Okay, please.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Any other question? Fine. No questions are forthcoming. Shall we wind up?
I think we'll wind up, sir. Ms. Pretty, you may go ahead with the word of thanks.
Yes, sir. A pleasant afternoon, one and all. I deem it a privilege to deliver the oath of thanks at this august occasion. At the outset, I thank Lord Almighty for His abundant blessings. I'm delighted to thank our rector, Reverend Dr. Henry Jerome S.J., for his guidance and counsel in all our ventures. I'd like to thank our secretary, Reverend Dr. Alphonse Manikam S.J., who motivates and encourages us to be the best in our endeavors. I offer my gratitude to our beloved principal, Reverend Dr. Mariadas S.J., for standing with us whenever we experiment things and for supporting us always. It is indeed an honor to thank our chief guest, Dr. D. Bennett, being one of the most sought after resource persons, especially at this hour where a number of webinars are conducted. Sir has been a very easy person to approach. Thank you, sir. And today's lecture was as usual astounding, and you were great. Thank you, sir, for your insightful thoughts and all things you've shared us through this lecture. Thank you. It's always a delight listening to you. I'm happy to thank our head of the department, Professor Twin Anthony Edward, for his meticulous planning and execution of this webinar in a successful way. Thank you, sir. I thank the members of the faculty of the Department of English, St. Xavier's College, for their various contributions in successful completion of this webinar. Thank you, professors. It's my pleasure to thank a former Deputy Principal, Dr. Joseph Albert, for gracing this webinar. Thank you, sir. I thank Dr. Lakshmi Kantam for her neat rendering of the event. I extend my gratitude to Dr. Ludusamy, the IQAC coordinator, and his team members, Mr. Sahayam and Mr. Milton, for helping us organize this webinar online virtually. Thank you, dear people. I also thank the respected faculty members from various institutions, research scholars, and students from various institutions for your active participation. Thank you, dear participants. Without you, this wouldn't have been a successful event. Thank you all. Have a great day.